And what's a DARPA-hard problem, and why do you need an organization like DARPA to tackle it?
Sort of as I was pointing out, the first part of a so-called DARPA-hard problem, it's something that lends itself to this contrarian alternative view. If there's a nice, clear technology roadmap, here's where the research community is, and here's the next logical step, we don't tend to get involved in those. We look at things, first of all, in a very different way. So is there a different way that technology can help solve this particular problem? But then the other part of it is, we're known as a risk-taking agency, but I like to characterize how we do things fairly uniquely as smart risk-taking. I put it the two extremes. One is I don't want any risk at all. I want to sort of prove to me all the technology is going to work before I go try something, and then I'll do little incremental baby steps. There's the other extreme, which I call, hope as a strategy. Someone comes forward with an innovative sounding idea and a pretty cartoon PowerPoint chart and say, wow, you're onto something. That's a really clever idea. And say, how are you going to do it? And it's like, well, I don't know. We'll hire smart people and they'll think about it. We start with problems where we understand enough about the problem that we know what the risks are. And we have some way to rationalize that we have a chance of being successful. And then we can build programs around that are focused at retiring those biggest risks first. And then we can move on to building bigger systems and doing more exotic programs. And that gets to one other thing I think is sort of magic about our model versus a lot of other R&D organizations. We do have latitude for a certain amount of curiosity-driven work, and we give a lot of flexibility and latitude to our program managers. It really is bottoms up based upon those program managers. But we're very problem-centric. We like to say we're mission-focused. So pretty much everything we do starts with what problem are you trying to solve? And then from there, we can explore, what are the different technology opportunities and have an extremely wide aperture. But I think it's that problem focus that also creates a lot of ability for DARPA to move things quickly, especially when you mix it with the risk-acceptant culture.
Yeah, and so you did a PhD in physics where you worked on quantum optics before it became quantum information. And I guess people now are familiar with the possibility to build quantum computers can open new fields, especially for things like cryptography or solving quantum systems and so on. And then you moved to DARPA where you worked as a scientist. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about this journey and how that influenced your sort of approach towards problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So, yeah, I like to joke around that I did quantum computing before it was cool. I was in a lab, a very, very prominent pioneer in the field of quantum optics, Professor Leonard Mandel. Unfortunately passed away a number of years ago, but he was one of the pioneers of quantum optics and really laid the foundation. And we were a lab group that was doing experimental realizations of quantum optics. And it was interesting. It was a fascinating, time for a PhD, and I love the research work. At the time, most of what we were doing was, frankly, experimental demonstrations of Copenhagen theory and various aspects of fundamental quantum mechanics. And it was exciting stuff. It was really fun research. At the same time, there was sort of this practical side nagging at me that said, everyone already believes this and accepts it. We just haven't demonstrated these particular principles. And it was interesting. I was writing my dissertation the year that Peter Shor published his factoring algorithm, which I would argue sort of kicked off the whole, quantum computing, quantum information area. But I had already made the decision that I was going to go do something more, quote, practical than continue this quantum optics stuff. So I went to work as a postdoc for the Air Force using a lot of the tools of what we had done in the lab. For instance, to do our research, my dissertation was doing quantum optics based upon two-photon entanglement. And so to implement that, we were doing a lot of work with nonlinear optics and spontaneous down conversion. When I started working for the Air Force Lab out at Wright-Patterson in Dayton, Ohio, they were interested in laser sources based upon nonlinear optics. So I got into the business of developing different types of laser and other optical sources and doing research in nonlinear optics. But I think that's where, again, this sort of practical side kind of tugged at me, because it was really interesting research going on there at the device and the system level. And I kept saying, but what's this good for? How are we ultimately going to be using it? And tried to look at the full system level problem. If we could do this radical new laser source, how would it help us build a sensor? And what would I need to go along with it in terms of a new type of camera? Is there software and different types of algorithmic processing that might make it a more practical capability if a lot of these LiDAR types of I'll call it beeps and squiggles, weren't intuitive to a human looking at a picture. And so that led me to sort of this system level kind of thinking, I would call it. And, I guess to some basic researchers that sounds like, might be boring or a little bit of a sellout, but, I found it fascinating to think about how can we take really fundamental science but apply it in this problem-centric sort of way. And that really excited me. And I had the opportunity in the mid-'90s to move to the D.C. area and start to work for DARPA, first as a support contractor, doing a lot of the technical analysis to help with execution of programs. And then a couple of years later, they yanked me over to the government side as a program manager. And that was a big jump also, because up until that point, I was doing very hands-on research. I had my own lab group, some graduate students I was advising, publishing papers, all those good things that I'm sure your viewers, their normal life. As a person at DARPA, I like to joke somewhat tongue-in-cheek. We don't actually do any real work. We just make PowerPoint and shovel money. There are no DARPA labs. Despite what is in the Tom Clancy video games and some of the movies. All of the actual research we do is extramural. We have our success based upon the team of contractors and university people and some of the other government labs that actually do the real hands-on research. But at the same time, we demand that the people who come to DARPA be highly technical. They need to be leaders in their field. They need to have done hands-on research, so that they're not bureaucrats. They're not paper pushers. They drive the vision. They're helping to create the vision. Back to that smart risk-taking that I said. They know enough themselves that they know what the technical risks are. They know how to structure their programs around those risks. And then even though the work's being done extramurally by this group of contractors and university performers, they can provide the due diligence. And again, a common sense way. A lot of parts of the government that don't have the same level of technical expertise, and their program managers have to resort to checklists and requirements and things like that. Our men and women are so experienced and acknowledged in their fields that they intuitively know what the issues are and can dig into them and ask the hard questions, and then based upon the response, then they're empowered to make decisions and pivot quickly as their research evolves.
Yeah, that's why I was going to ask you how important it is that leaders know and understand what's happening in the labs, because sometimes you have managers, people coming from business environments or managerial careers that have no idea about the technical sides. They don't have any background. So how important it is? I mean, we have the biggest example probably is Elon Musk, right? He knows every single thing probably. That's the story. But I imagine that's correct. And that's how he runs successfully these multiple companies. So how important is this kind of aspect for you?
It's very important. But it takes a certain breed of researcher. So that you have to have been technical coming in. Interestingly enough, we don't have any firm requirements on credentials. While the majority of people at DARPA have PhDs in a technical field, it's not a hard mandate. But we do look for people who are technically accomplished, who have actually done their own research, The model, I like to say, and even this is not hard and fast, we like to say that you've got to be, a mile deep in some technical area, just so you have that experience base and you know what it's like to do research. But you also have to be inch deep, at least, across a very wide range. That's, I think, one thing that differentiates a DARPA program manager from a lot of other very accomplished researchers. You could have someone who is, one of the world-leading researcher in whatever their academic area is, and they work in it their entire career, but you ask that person to step outside that lane and they get very uncomfortable. DARPA PMs have to also be very fast studies. I think that maybe the biggest characteristic, I never really thought about this, but it's academic curiosity. It's someone who has already proven that they can go deep, that they've got the technical chops, but then it's also augmented by that technical curiosity that, a new challenge comes up and someone presents them a new idea. I can be a quick study. And I'm not going to be the expert who's going to go toe-to-toe doing the research. But like you said with Elon Musk, he's not building SpaceX rockets, or he's not designing batteries himself. But he's a quick enough study that he can ask the right questions and make informed decisions. And that's kind of the model that we look at for our program managers.
So what kind of organizational structure do you have there? Is it flat or is it tall? I mean, is the management command-oriented or is it flat?
It's very flat. It's
Okay.
very flat. So my point about, we don't have DARPA labs, it pretty much begins and ends with the program managers. I mentioned we've got these 6 technical offices, but they're populated by program managers. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it's somewhere around 100 or so program managers. And everything begins and ends with them. They generate the ideas, they execute their program activities, overseeing them. But again, the actual research work is conducted extramurally. As a result, we don't have a structure below them. And above them, it's basically folks at my level, at the office management level, and then the agency director and deputy. So, within execution of an actual research portfolio, the PMs have more or less total autonomy and freedom on how to execute the programs. Now, if any of them listen to this podcast, some of them will probably, grimace when I say this, but, we at the office level have very little control or oversight of what they do, or even when they start their programs. The ideas generate them. We do provide at the office level what's called an office strategy, and there's a similar strategy at the agency level. But those are just general guidelines, to lay down, these are the types of problems we're interested in. And then it's ultimately up to them to generate the ideas and then execute those ideas on their own.
Thank you for listening to this conversation with Dr. Timothy Grayson. And I'd also like to thank DARPA's communication team for making this possible. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment below, like, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and support this channel on Patreon. This podcast will be also available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and you can find the links in the description below. Thanks for watching.